The early morning light barely touched the cold stone floors of the royal palace as Kate made her way through the narrow service corridor. She had been working as a maid in the palace for only 3 months, but already the weight of its ancient walls felt suffocating on her shoulders. Her arms ached from carrying a heavy tray of silk fabrics that needed to be delivered to the senior ladies-in-waiting before sunrise. Kate was not like the other servants. She had arrived at the palace with no connections, no family name to protect her, only a desperate need to escape a past she never spoke about. Her feet moved quickly, silently, as she had been trained, but something felt wrong that morning. The corridor seemed darker than usual, the air thicker, and there was a strange smell lingering near the eastern wing. She tried to ignore it, telling herself it was just her imagination playing tricks on her tired mind. But as she passed the old storage room, the door creaked open by itself, and Kate froze. Inside, she could see something red pooling on the floor, spreading slowly like dark paint. Her heart began to race, and the tray slipped from her hands, sending the expensive fabrics tumbling to the ground. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The world began to spin faster and faster until everything went black. Kate collapsed right there in the middle of the corridor, then her body hitting the cold stone with a soft thud, and the last thing she saw before losing consciousness was a pair of polished black boots walking toward her. When Kate opened her eyes again, she was lying on a wooden bench in a small guard room she had never seen before. Her head pounded painfully and her mouth felt dry like sandpaper. A young palace guard sat beside her, holding a cup of water with a worried expression on his face. His name was Minho, and Kate had seen him sometimes during her duties, always standing tall and silent near the royal library. He had kind eyes, which was rare in a place where everyone seemed to hide their true selves behind masks of politeness. Minho helped her sit up slowly and explained that he had found her unconscious in the corridor and carried her here where no one would ask questions. He told her that he had checked the storage room she had seen, but there was nothing there now, no red liquid, and no sign of anything unusual. Kate knew what she had seen, but she also knew better than to argue. In the palace, seeing things that were not supposed to be there could get a person killed. Minho studied her face carefully, as if trying to decide whether he could trust her. Then he lowered his voice and told her something that made her blood run cold. He said that strange things had been happening in the palace for months, things that no one talked about openly. Servants disappearing, late-night meetings in forbidden areas, and rumors of a secret that powerful people would do anything to protect. Kate realized then that her fainting in that corridor might have saved her life, because if she had screamed, if she had drawn attention to what she saw, she might have become the next person to disappear. Over the next few days, Kate tried to return to her normal duties, but her mind kept drifting back to the storage room and to Minho's warning. She noticed things she had never paid attention to before. The way some guards looked away when certain nobles passed by. The whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when servants approached. The locked doors in hallways that seemed to lead nowhere. Kate began to understand that the palace was like a living creature, with secrets hidden in every shadow and lies woven into every beautiful tapestry. She also found herself thinking about Minho more often than she should. But he would appear unexpectedly during her chores, always with some small excuse, but she knew he was watching over her. One evening, as she was returning to the servants' quarters, Minho stepped out from behind a pillar and pulled her gently into an empty chamber. His face was pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he told her that he had been doing his own investigation since finding her in the corridor. What he discovered terrified him. The red liquid she had seen was blood, human blood, and the storage room was used for something far darker than anyone could imagine. Minho said there was a hidden passage behind that room, one that led to a part of the palace that officially did not exist. He had seen things there that made him question everything he believed about the royal family he had sworn to protect. The revelation hit Kate like a physical blow. She had come to the palace hoping to find safety, to build a new life far from the troubles of her past. But now she found herself caught in something much larger and more dangerous than anything she had ever faced. Minho told her that he had recognized her from somewhere before, not from the palace, but from his life before becoming a guard. He asked if she had ever lived in the northern province, if her family had once been wealthy before disaster struck. Kate felt her heart stop. She had hidden her past so carefully, erased all traces of who she used to be. Yet here was this guard. Here's this kind man who had saved her, piecing together her secrets while simultaneously revealing his own. She realized that they were both trapped in the same web of palace intrigue, two ordinary people who had stumbled into a nightmare not of their making. Minho took her hand and told her that he needed her help. He could not investigate alone anymore, and he trusted her because he knew something about her past that she had never told anyone. He knew that her father had once worked in the palace, thus that he had disappeared under mysterious circumstances years ago, and that Kate had come here looking for answers just as much as she had come running from pain. Kate felt the world shift beneath her feet. All this time, she thought she had been hiding from her past. But the past had been waiting for her right here in this palace of shadows and lies. Minho explained that her father's disappearance was connected to the same secret he had discovered behind the storage room. And the same powerful people were involved, the same cover-ups, the same cold disregard for human life. Kate realized that her fainting in that corridor was not just an accident. It was fate, pulling her toward the truth she had been seeking her whole life. She looked at Minho, at his honest face and steady hands, and made a decision that would change everything. She agreed to help him uncover the palace's darkest secret, no matter the cost. Together, they would venture into the hidden passage, but they would find out what really happened to her father, and they would expose the truth even if it meant risking their own lives. The palace thought it could keep its secrets forever, but it had not counted on a maid who refused to look away and a guard who refused to stay silent. That night, under the cover of darkness, Kate and Minho made their way back to the storage room. Minho carried a small lantern, its light barely enough to see a few steps ahead. The corridor felt different at night, colder, more alive with unseen presences. When they reached the storage room, Minho showed Kate how to trigger the hidden mechanism, a loose stone near the floor that opened a panel in the wall. Behind it lay a narrow staircase spiraling downward into absolute blackness. Kate's hands shook as she followed Minho into the depths, each step taking them further from the world she knew. The air grew damp and heavy, smelling of earth and something else, something metallic and wrong. That at the bottom of the stairs, they found a chamber that made Kate gasp in horror. It was a small dungeon hidden beneath the beautiful palace, with iron chains hanging from the walls and dark stains covering the floor. This was where the palace's real work was done, where people were brought to disappear forever, where secrets were buried alive. Minho held the lantern high, and in its flickering light, Kate saw writing carved into the stone walls. Names, dates, desperate messages from people who had been held here, and there in the corner she saw something that made her fall to her knees. It was a small pendant, half hidden in the dirt, the same pendant her father had worn every day of his life. She picked it up with trembling fingers, feeling the familiar weight of it, knowing without doubt that her father had been here, that he had suffered and died in this terrible place. Tears streamed down her face as Minho knelt beside her, and his hand on her shoulder a silent comfort. But there was no time for grief, because at that moment they heard footsteps above, heavy and purposeful, coming down the stairs. Someone had discovered their lantern light. Someone was coming to make sure they never left this place alive. Kate clutched her father's pendant to her heart and prepared to face whatever came next, knowing that she was finally closer to the truth than she had ever been, and that truth might be the death of her. And the footsteps grew closer, and Kate could see Minho's hand moving to the sword at his belt. But instead of the armed guards they expected, an old woman appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her face wrinkled like ancient parchment and her eyes sharp as knives. She wore the simple clothes of a cleaning woman, but there was nothing simple about the way she looked at them, measuring, calculating, deciding their fate. The old woman spoke in a voice like rustling leaves. I'm telling them that she had been waiting for someone to find this place for 30 years. She was the one who had left the door open that morning, who had made sure Kate saw what was inside the storage room. She had been watching Kate since the day she arrived at the palace, recognizing in her face the features of the man she had loved and lost. Kate's father had been this woman's friend, her only ally in the palace, and she had watched him be taken to this dungeon and never return. Or now she was old and dying, and she needed someone to carry on the fight, to expose the truth that had been buried for too long. The old woman told them everything about the secret society within the palace that sold information to enemy kingdoms, about the noblemen who used the dungeon to silence anyone who discovered their treason, about the royal family member who protected them in exchange for wealth and power. Kate's father had discovered their plot, had gathered proof, and had been captured before he could expose them. But he had hidden the evidence somewhere in the palace, and the old woman believed it was still there, waiting to be found. Kate realized that her father had not died in vain, that he had left behind a weapon that could bring down the most powerful people in the kingdom. She looked at Minho and saw the same determination in his eyes. They would find the proof, they would honor her father's memory, and they would tear down the palace's walls of secrecy once and for all. But first, they had to get out of the dungeon alive, and the old woman warned them that the guards would be making their rounds soon. Minho led the way back up the stairs, his senses alert for any sound or movement. They emerged into the storage room just as they heard voices in the main corridor, guards talking and laughing as they passed. Kate pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath, and her father's pendant warm against her skin. When the voices faded, she and Minho slipped out and disappeared into the shadows. But they knew this was only the beginning. The old woman had given them a clue, a location where her father used to hide his most important documents. It was in the royal library, behind a specific book that had been there for centuries. Tomorrow, during the chaos of the midday meal when most of the palace would be occupied, they would make their move. Kate returned to her small room that night but could not sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about her father and the life he must have lived in his final days. She thought about the old woman, spending 30 years alone with her grief and her secrets, waiting for someone to carry the torch. And she thought about Minho, this brave guard who had risked everything for a truth that was not even his own. Whatever happened tomorrow, that Kate knew she was no longer the frightened maid who had collapsed in the corridor. She was her father's daughter, and she would finish what he started. The midday sun was high and bright when Kate entered the royal library, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. She carried a stack of books as an excuse, pretending to return them to their proper places while her eyes scanned the shelves for the one the old woman had described. Minho stood guard near the entrance, watching for any sign of danger. Kate's fingers traced the spines of ancient volumes until she found it, a thick book bound in faded red leather, sitting exactly where it should be. She pulled it gently, and behind it, she found a small compartment built into the wall. Inside lay a bundle of papers, yellowed with age but still intact. She slipped them into her clothing just as the library door opened and a group of nobles entered, laughing loudly about some court gossip. That Kate forced herself to walk slowly, calmly, toward the exit, nodding politely as she passed the nobles. Minho fell into step beside her, and together they made their way to a secluded garden where no one would overhear them. The documents were everything the old woman had promised and more. Letters between palace officials and foreign agents, records of payments made for secrets sold, names of everyone involved in the conspiracy. And at the bottom of the pile, a personal letter from her father, and written in his familiar handwriting, addressed to her. In it, he explained that he had known he might not survive, that he had done everything to protect his family from the danger he had uncovered. He wrote of his love for her, his pride in the woman he knew she would become, and his hope that someday the truth would set them all free. Kate wept as she read, but these were not tears of sorrow alone. They were tears of connection, of finally understanding the father she had lost, and of knowing that his love had never died. Minho held her as she cried, and in that moment something shifted between them. They were no longer just allies in a dangerous game. They were two people who had found in each other a reason to hope, a reason to believe that good could still exist in a world full of darkness. The time had come to act. Kate and Minho knew they could not confront the conspirators directly. They were too powerful, too well protected. But they could go to someone who had the authority to investigate, someone outside the palace's corrupt system. Minho knew of a magistrate in the city who had a reputation for honesty, a man who had tried before to expose corruption but lacked the evidence. Now they had that evidence. They made their plans carefully, knowing that one wrong move would mean their deaths. That night, Minho would slip out of the palace and deliver the documents to the magistrate. Kate would stay behind, creating the illusion that everything was normal, praying that Minho would return safely. As darkness fell, they said goodbye in the same corridor where Kate had fainted just days ago. Minho took her face in his hands and kissed her forehead gently, promising to come back. Then he was gone, swallowed by the night, and Kate was left alone with her fears and her hopes. The hours that followed were the longest of Kate's life. She paced her small room, jumping at every sound, imagining 100 terrible scenarios. But just before dawn, there was a soft knock at her door. Minho stood there, exhausted but alive, a smile spreading across his tired face. The magistrate had believed them, had taken the evidence and promised to act immediately. By sunrise, palace guards loyal to the magistrate would arrest the conspirators. Kate threw her arms around Minho, holding him tight, feeling the weight of years of fear and grief finally lifting from her shoulders. As they stood together at her small window, watching the sky begin to lighten, knowing that everything was about to change. The arrests came swiftly, as the magistrate had promised. Kate watched from a hidden corner as the powerful nobles who had destroyed her father were led away in chains, their faces pale with shock and disbelief. The royal family member who had protected them was placed under house arrest, awaiting judgment. Word spread through the palace like wildfire, servants whispering in amazement that justice had finally come. The old woman who had helped them was found and given a place of honor, her years of silent service finally recognized. And Kate, the maid who had fainted in the corridor, became something of a legend, though she wanted none of the attention. All she wanted was to visit her father's grave, to tell him that his sacrifice had not been in vain, to thank him for leaving behind the truth that had set them all free. And in the weeks that followed, Kate and Minho built a new life together. No longer servants of a corrupt palace, but free people with a future full of possibility. They visited the magistrate often, learning that the investigations had uncovered even more corruption, that the rot in the palace went deep but was finally being cut out. Kate kept her father's pendant always around her neck, a reminder of the man who had loved her enough to die for what was right. And she kept the letter he had written, reading it whenever she needed strength, hearing his voice in every word. The palace still stood, beautiful and ancient, but its shadows no longer held power over her. She had walked through the darkness and come out the other side, and she knew now that some truths were worth any price. Years later, Kate would tell this story to her children, sitting by the fire in a peaceful home far from the palace walls. As she would tell them about the corridor and the fainting, about the guard with kind eyes who saved her, about the old woman who waited 30 years for justice. She would show them the pendant and the letter, tangible proof that courage and love could overcome even the darkest secrets. And she would teach them that sometimes the smallest people, the maids and the guards and the cleaning women, were the ones who held the power to change everything. Because they saw what others ignored, and they remembered what others forgot, and they refused to let the truth die. Kate's story became a legend of its own, passed down through generations, a reminder that even in the most sinister places hope could survive and love could conquer all.